Hello friends, good morning. Welcome to my channel. My name is Bernard. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the great Frank Passa, violin and bow maker and seller of fine stringed instruments in San Francisco. J. Kroc-Malnick, the concertmaster of San Francisco Symphony, called Frank a great friend to violins and violinists, and he was. Frank owned the Primo Violin Shop, the best shop in San Francisco when I was growing up in San Francisco. He grew up in New York City and studied violin making with Simone Ciccone, an Italian immigrant, very famous maker. Frank knew violin quality by instinct and had grown the reputation of never selling anything that wasn't top of the line. As a kid, I'd go down to his busy and cluttered shop on Sutter Street. The rooms were piled high with violin cases and cello cases, but he always kept a couple of rooms free for clients to try out instruments. Frank soon got to know me and thought I was a talented young player. Once he pointed me to a room and said, "Go in there. Wait there for a moment. I'm going to bring you a violin to try." He actually called it a fiddle. That's what we do. We call violin, fiddle, interchangeable words. Oh my God. He came in and he offered me a Niccolo Amati violin, a maker who worked in the first half of the 17th century. This thing was old. And Amati was also one of the greatest master makers in history. Frank said, "Educate yourself." So I played, and I can never forget the beauty of that yellow varnish and the smoothness of that mellow tone. Pure Italian. Frank, he was a shrewd businessman. He's sizing me up as a prospective customer to buy fine equipment from him as the years rolled by. I did. I bought a beautiful Picot bow copy made by Morgan Anderson through Frank, who had various artists working for him, and then Frank would have his name stamped on the bow. But later, the big moment for Frank and me was when he bought two violins, a Guadagnini, which is an Italian maker, fine Italian maker, and an 1813 Lupo violin, Nicolas Lupo, great French maker. And he bought it from the estate of a wealthy man. I forget his first name. Banks was the estate. And so Frank bought them and then offered them for sale in San Francisco. So Frank let me play both violins, and I particularly loved the Lupo. The Guad was good, but I loved the Lupo. And of course, the Guad was a little bit of a brown varnish, and that didn't appeal to me. And the Lupo was more red. It just amazing flashes of brilliance through this iridescence. It was just a wonderful varnish. But Frank, he was a salesman through and through, and he made me wait a while. He said that he just got the violin in the shop and needed to be sure it was in top shape. I'd have to wait a couple of months before he'd be ready to give me a solid price, but he said it would probably be at least X. Well, I'm not going to mention the numbers, because the numbers back in those days mean nothing in relation to what they are today. So let's just say it was a lot of money. Well, after a couple of months, and after he'd shown it to a few more violinists who mentioned, "Oh, I saw the Lupo up at Frank's shop." Frank then told me, he told me the going price was X plus quite a bit more. I was learning how sales negotiations happen. Well, after saving every penny for my whole life from my allowance and then my symphony pay, living at home with my parents, I could luckily afford to buy the violin and was happy doing it. It was a gorgeous Lupo with dazzling red varnish, top papers, and everyone who saw it agreed it was a special Lupo. I played the Lupo for about 5 years with ups and downs about the violin response. I finally had the bass bar replaced. And that's a story unto itself, and I'll tell that story in another video about another very, very famous name in violin repair. During this time, I was also looking for a good bow, a special one to add to the Sartori and Tubbs I already played, Sartori being a French maker and Tubbs was a very famous English maker. One day, I stopped down at Frank's shop, now moved a few blocks away from the Sutter address, and I don't remember what street that was on, but I can kind of visualize it, going north, whatever. Frank wasn't in that day, but Jim Fury, the bow rehair expert, was holding the fort down. He had my rehaired Tubbs bow ready for me and said, "Oh, by the way, Frank just got a tort in for sale. You want to see it?" Did I? Wow, a tort. It was a wonderful French bow made by Tort Père, as the father was called, the father of the famous Francois Tort. Francois Tort, the most famous bow maker of all time. And Tort Père, the father, had two sons. One, Francois, was the younger, and the older was called Tort l'Aîné, the oldest. Tort, the oldest. I don't even remember. Maybe they don't even know what their first names were. Well, I fell in love with the bow, and when I talked to Frank, he quoted a price that other musicians thought were way, way out of line, way high. I showed the bow to some of my colleagues in the symphony, and they said, it's a good bow, but that price? Oh my God. But, Frank always sold the best quality. So I bought it. And by the way, eventually I did sell that bow, and I never lost a penny on what I paid Frank. For some reason, I ended up going over to Frank's home in Forest Hill area of San Francisco to pay him for the bow. That night, as we chatted, Frank told me the story of selling a quartet of Strad instruments. That means 2 violins, a viola, and cello. He had acquired the Strads and later had arranged a banquet and invited some wealthy violin-playing friends to the party. He also hired a professional string quartet to play the 4 Strads in a little concert. Frank said he was able to pay for his house after he sold those 4 Strads. I visited his house many times at Christmas or New Year's. Frank always hosted get-together for musicians and friends, had wonderful parties. He always said that we can entertain each other. So many professional and amateur players would take center stage and play music for the group. Very sweet times. I remember seeing my orchestra colleague Ernie Bacalian and his family there one year. Years before, Ernie had heard me play on a kiddie concert, kiddie recital that, kids play on, and had told me after hearing me, "You make the violin talk." I've never forgotten those words. It was so kind of him. What praise from a professional violinist. And Ernie was always a good friend to me during the years I played with him in the San Francisco Symphony. Some years later, Frank was very helpful for me in selling my Gone violin, which my parents had bought for me when I was 14 or 15. And I still owned that as well as the Lupo, so he sold it for me. Then when I decided to move on from the Lupo, Frank sold that for me and gave me a very good settlement, almost twice as much as I paid for it. So no complaints there. The price was high to start with, but he helped me on the other end. So as Jake said, Frank was a good friend to violinists. When I was a young college player, he loaned me a nice Italian violin to play on for a year, and I knew other young players that he had lent violins to also. From Frank, I learned many things about the business of violins as well as about human kindness, his kindness, helping young people advance their education and careers. He helped many young players to gain experience with fine instruments and bows, and many of us ended up buying our violins and bows from him. It was a win-win for all of us. I think we players should visit the violin shops in our area and get to know the owners and violin repairmen, just like I did when I was young. Here in Santa Rosa, Mick Loveland's violin shop is my favorite. He offers repairs, rehairs, sales of instruments at all levels. How could I do my teaching without him supplying quality instruments for my students? Mick and I have worked together for many years, helping students find instruments that suit their budgets and skills. Mick has 100%, my 100% trust, and he always makes difficult choices easy by being professional, thorough, and flexible. He's a great guy. His son Julian's now working with him, and it's a great 1-2 punch there, where you know that Mick may be moving toward retirement, and there's Julian. He's going to take over the business. So I'm getting to know Julian very well also. I also have friendships with 2 fine violin makers who live close by me here, Tony Lane and Andy Carruthers, both of them very fine makers, committed to the highest level of making, and very successful makers also. So you there, seek out, both shops for repair, but also makers that are creating new instruments. I also want to give a shout out to my Facebook friend John Van Royen, whom I followed for many years, way back from his time in Gainesville, Florida, with his fantastic and popular violin shop. And now he's moved to Brookings, Oregon, and still making beautiful violins for artists and students alike. Really a great guy. Really enjoyed following him. And then finally, I want to say many thanks to Francine Passa, Frank's beautiful daughter, for posting photos of Frank on her Facebook wall. Francine has been a good friend to me since high school, and she lives close by me here. Okay, thank you so much for listening and learning a little bit about Frank Passa. And so I hope you have a great day. Hey, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Really appreciate that. And have a great day.